Today, I'm going to be talking with Katie Edmonds of Heal Endo. Katie is an endometriosis-focused author, educator, and nutritional therapist. She's the author of the 4-week endometriosis diet plan and Heal Endo, an anti-inflammatory approach to healing from endometriosis. Heal Endo is a book which gave me so many aha moments. It's the book that we all wish we'd had when we were diagnosed and are so grateful now to have access to. Her book and our interview encourages us with the right insight, mindset, and knowledge that we can heal ourselves and take back the quality of life. It was such an honor to talk with Katie about her own journey with endometriosis and then how that transformed into her sharing that there is hope. Welcome, Katie. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. And I know that there are so many areas that I would like to go through with you, but I would really love to start if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you and your background, your journey with endometriosis, and then sort of bring us up to modern day with what you're working with and doing at the moment.
Yes, of course. I'm a nutritional therapist and I specialize in endometriosis, and everything I do is endometriosis related. So I have 2 endometriosis books. I have a website that's just solely dedicated to endometriosis information, holistic healing, integrative care. And, I got into all of that as most of us do. We dealt with it ourselves, right? Whenever someone has some sort of big issue and it becomes their life, it ends up being their life's work if they have success with it. And that was me. So I'm surprised and happy to be here in a way, because 15 years ago, this is not at all where I thought I would be. I was diagnosed. It's been, I guess, about 15 years exactly at this point. And my pain came on so suddenly. I didn't have like years of symptoms that were just dragging. It was like, well, to be clear, I was having sex and I felt like my uterus exploded. It was so intense, so horrible. And the pain went away after a few hours. And it was just sort of this dull pain that continued like forever. And I thought it couldn't be endometriosis. It wasn't period pain. This was just radical pelvic pain. And lo and behold, I did get a diagnosis for suspected endometriosis. I had the blood in the peritoneal cavity. I had all the sensitive palpitation points. They ruled out some other things and said, okay, it looks like endometriosis. And I was just devastated to be 24 with this diagnosis, because 15 years ago, it's actually no different from today. You go online and you research endometriosis, and there's, unfortunately, people who have the worst experiences are often the most vocal online. So they have these big blogs about how it's like the worst disease in the world. And it honestly is there's a great number of people, but that's the hope that you get, right? As like a newly diagnosed patient, like this is going nowhere but down, and how you mitigate the down is kind of up to you. And without a lot of information, I was just sort of like this throwing mud at the wall to see what would stick. I'm on birth control, I'm on all these pain medications. Well, it was actually just ibuprofen. So much ibuprofen, I kind of destroyed my stomach. But I wasn't given information, right? Like, you shouldn't take too much. It was just the doctor saying sort of like, go forth on your journey and try to survive by any means possible. And it's just pretty radical for patients hoping for a quality of life that never seems to return. So I say it was about 10 years later. At this point, I'm dealing with unexplained infertility and chronic fatigue. It's so different from just being tired. Like, I was in that boat of like taking a shower. It was pretty hard to muster up the energy and clean the house. Like, who can do that? But I'm like 29 years old, and I just became furious because you don't want to be here. No one wants to be stuck in that boat. Like, I'm not even 30. I want to have kids. And then I think, if I do have kids, how am I going to have the energy and stamina to take care of those little things? And it was the fury at me being a perfectionist. I think a lot of us with endometriosis have those underpinnings of like wanting to do everything right, wanting to please. And I was there and I had listened to the doctors. I had done my 2 surgeries. I had done the birth control forever. All the, I was trying to do everything to axe my estrogen, which I thought at the time would keep my endometriosis at bay. I just didn't know what this disease was. And I started to research. So that was my fury, led me to say, I got to research. I'm not going to read any more blogs. I'm not going to read, a little random health site. I'm going to go straight to PubMed. And within minutes, my jaw was dropping. I was like, what? This isn't a hormonal disease. This is an inflammatory disease. It's enormous roots in immune dysfunction here. And I knew autoimmune diseases. I knew cancer being exactly the same, inflammatory disease with immune dysfunction. And I thought, well, if I can look at how those things are treated, maybe I can start finding a different path for my endometriosis. My goal was just to get pregnant. And lo and behold, I say I accidentally put my endometriosis in remission because it wasn't my goal, because I didn't know it was a possibility. That it was over the next few years, all of my endo symptoms disappeared, just disappeared, complete remission. Now, my doctor who told me I needed to get a hysterectomy and adopt, I, was sort of flipped him the fingers. I got pregnant naturally, and everything clicked into place. Later on, I had a surprise pregnancy down the line, so I now have two wonderful little kids, and my health at 38 is so much better than my health at 23. And all of that good stuff, all the good changes that came from that journey is now my passion to help other women understand the process of endometriosis, how it's not just one thing you get, how it's not a genetic disease, how it's not a hormonal disease, and that there is such a better way for treatment. We just have to be open to learning new things about it.
Absolutely. And I think it's that multifactorial approach, isn't it? And recognizing that there's so much more to it than what we see when we first open Dr. Google and find and piece together these things that fill us with fear. And I think fear is the underlying message that we hear again and again in the community upon diagnosis or suspected diagnosis of it as well. So it's really an interesting thing. And there's something that caught my eye in your book when I read it for the first time. And I really wish when I had my diagnosis that I could have had this book at that time to just sort of unpick it. It's such a great thing for people to be able to get to grips with now. But there was one quote that really stood out for me when I first opened it, because it just resonated so much with my experiences. And the quote is, "Here's the truth. Endo is, or endometriosis is an inflammatory condition rooted in immune dysfunction." And it just made so much sense for me, because so many of my symptoms felt so much more like it was that than just the period pain. And I almost felt like a fraud sometimes with my diagnosis, because it wasn't as extreme as so many people that I read about in blogs. It was much more subtle, and yet it was constantly sort of there. And different environments and landscapes made it easier versus others. So I would love if you could unpick what you mean by that for some of our listeners today, and just explore a little bit more about that sort of an immune dysfunction, rooted in immune dysfunction.
Yes. So that is the focus of my book, is shifting our perspective from this woman's disease, a period problem, right? My endometriosis, I never had period pain ever. I would have some ovulation pain. I had pain a lot, like weeks. But so for me, it was the story of endo didn't fit with me either. I thought, this isn't me. There's something else going on here. So to understand how that works, we have to separate a basic understanding of the immune system. And I think most people have married the idea of the immune system to being sick. And so you think, well, I don't get sick a lot, so I don't understand why I have endometriosis. Or some people say, well, why do I get sick so much with endometriosis? Oh, is it the endo causing me to get sick? So that's not it at all. So your immune system is in charge of so many things. And when you think that we are these like 98-degree warm, moist organisms living in a world crawling with bacteria and bugs and viruses and mold and toxins and fungi, like if you watch an animal die and lay on the ground, not to be graphic, but I live in the tropics, like within 2 days, the thing is just overflowing, like being eaten to bits. So what's preventing us from that happening is our immune system. It protects us 24/7. And it does this 2 ways. There's one I call the attack mode. And this is when you have all of your inflammatory immune factors. So yes, inflammation is your immune system. They're a bunch of little, I say like army men. They'll have their own jobs, their own names like cytokines and macrophages, right? Like you could just go on and on. But they all attack when there's cellular damage. They don't know what's going on. They just know there's cellular damage and they're there to attack. The other side of the immune system is your fixer, your repairer, your mender, your cleaner, upperer. Not really a word, but you have a damaged cell, a mutated cell. Heck, when you go to the gym and you do 100 squats, like the reason why your butt is so sore is not because you did a squat, is because the squat, all that pressure damaged the muscle, little micro tears, and your immune system rushes to the scene saying, there's some damage. We're going to inflame that to make sure that it's safe. And then in comes your repairer and it builds new muscle. So thanks to your immune system, you can build like a strong, supple booty. But that's, protects you from all these diseases, et cetera. So to summarize that, with what we have with endometriosis is we have the immune system is misbehaving. And that's what immune dysfunction is. It means it's either doing something that it shouldn't, or it's not doing something that it should. And with endometriosis, we have both things happening. So first of all, the immune system's inflammation wing is misbehaving. And what happens is that when it sees an endo-like cell, this is a cell that is not normal, has similar behavior to the endometrial lining of the uterus, but very different. Your immune system should say, whoa, abnormal, we're taking it out. But instead, the inflammation comes in and actually sews it into your tissue. You call this activation. It establishes blood supply. So now you have oxygen to this little cell. You have lymph, you have nutrients and blood. It's vascularized, which means it's a living, breathing part of your body. So now you officially have endometriosis thanks to your immune system. And this is really interesting because in studies, it shows that up to 10% of fetuses actually have endo-like tissue in the deep cul-de-sac area, but 60% of those are prevented. It's only 40% of women end up having endometriosis here, which is really interesting. So it shows that it's prevented. You can have a cell, but without that immune response, without the immune dysfunction, it may never become endometriosis. So potentially you could prevent endo by preventing this inflammation, immune dysfunction. And then the second step is the immune cleanup, that your immune system should see this weird cell or this weird lesion and take it out. They take it out with the trash, but it's not. And then it's the inflammation that never stops. These little army guys attacking and attacking. If they never get the signal to stop, what it does is it creates damage. Like if you have a splinter in your foot and it, is like a dirty splinter, you have to get that splinter out or your whole foot will like swell with inflammation. Like, your body is going overdrive at this point. So when that happens inside at our delicate internal organs, what it can do is lead to things like scar tissue and intra-abdominal adhesions. So it's not your endometriosis lesions throwing scar tissue around. I sort of used to think that like they were making little spider webs. It's just your immune system creating all the damage, and the damage eventually sears your organs together. So that's the progressive view of endometriosis, that it can go in that progressive way if you don't stop the inflammation. And that's why the entire goal of having an inflammatory disease is to stop as much inflammation as you can. And with the research, we know there's two places of inflammation, one locally, so right at the place of the lesion, and that's obvious. But two, there's systemic inflammation and systemic immune dysfunction as well. So in a way, you can think of endometriosis almost as the lesions are the manifestation of a disease. They are not the disease, right? They're part of the problem. But when we have this laser-eyed focus on, the lesions, this is me, I used to think the lesions just appeared in my body, and the only way to get them out is surgery. And that puts all of your emphasis on this little lesion when you think, well, the whole body is out of balance and dealing with inflammation. If we can lower all the inflammation, where can we get from there? So that is how you deal with basically all inflammatory diseases of our day.
And it's such an interesting concept, isn't it? And this idea that you share often and go into a lot of detail in your book around this concept of the whole body ecology and its role in endo, and how we have these 11 systems within our body, which some of us know about in depth, and some of us, are familiar with a handful of them. And this idea of harmony. And I always like to think about this inner world. And when I'm sharing yoga, a lot of us are thinking about the physical shape and how it looks and how we're moving. But it's more about thinking about the organs inside and how everything is interconnected and everything works together. And we need to kind of keep the inside in balance with the outside, and the front of the body in balance with the back of the body and everything. So when I read about this in your book, I was fascinated, because there's this continuous stream of healthy, soothing inputs that's needed to come back to balance with all of these areas. And I would just love to know a little bit about what you think are some of those soothing inputs. What could that look like? And I'm thinking sort of from a yoga perspective, it's sort of breath work and movement. But what would be some of the places that you would start to think about to come back to balance?
Well, there's a lot. And I mean, you're absolutely right too. And that intuition is 100% supported by the published literature, which is what is so fascinating. The the breath work, the movement, and I think the yoga, like the vibe you have, is the first thing that comes to mind is just nervous system regulation. And we know that the nervous system is intricately linked to lesion development. That if you block actually the stress hormones, that endometriosis is better prevented from recurrence after surgery than blocking estrogen. So potentially stress hormones for some of us are more of an instigator than the sex hormones, which is, has been the sole focus. And maybe I'll say before I continue a little forward, because this is interesting, is the lesions don't just progress, lesions can regress. So when I'm talking now about how we can balance the inside of the body, that can actually have a direct effect on the size of your lesion. That, there's the progressive direction in research looking at women, so not animals, shows that on average about a third of women have progressive endo, but 2/3 of women might have endo that stabilizes or regresses in size. So those are the women that are, potentially doing these things that are also shown in research to help reduce the size of the lesion. So this is the direction that we want to go with the body ecology. So just so someone's not thinking like, well, how's the nervous system going to affect my lesion? We say, well, potentially very dramatically, it really can. So there's even a genotype. I was just reading some research this morning about a genotype that is associated with both endometriosis and anxiety. And how I was saying I was this high performing person, feeling like I was doing everything right. There's also this underpinning for a lot of patients. So many women that I talk to with endometriosis have this bit of underlying anxiety. And in the research, it shows up to 87.5% of us admit to dealing with anxiety, right?
Wow.
So you say, well, does that come before or after? But what it does is any anxiety is your body saying it's stressed, even if you know you shouldn't be stressed. If you are living on a tropical beach with a pina colada in hand, if you have some anxiety right now, you're going to have those stress hormones. So the stress hormones, they progress and fuel inflammation. They directly tell your immune system that there's danger. That's what your nervous system is there for. But your immune system doesn't know that you have social anxiety versus, you're being chased by a leopard or whatever else. And it just produces inflammation in case you're scratched, in case you need some, immediate old-fashioned antibiotics, which is what inflammation is. It's how your body dealt with the potential for infection. So anytime if you're in a chronic state of worry, I'm trying to say stress less, because I think a lot of people are a little detached from what stress is because they're so chronically stressed. This was me. I didn't think I was stressed, but it's because I was stressed my whole life. Worry, anxiety, feeling rushed, feeling flustered, feeling overwhelmed, feeling burnt out, feeling any of those things. Like even just being on screens, thinking you're relaxing is a stressful experience if you're not, doing a meditation or whatever it is. I had a stress tracker for a minute, and I noticed when I did 10 minutes on social media, it was like, whoop, it went up so high. And I didn't even realize I was stressed, but it measures your breathing and your heart rate. So your physiology is saying you're stressed, even if your brain is like, not stressed. So yeah, those things can directly affect the disease and keep us in the disease state, right? And that's just the nervous system. So we know that the microbiome is so intricately linked to endometriosis. It's kind of mind-blowing. In my book, I call it the smoking gun behind endometriosis, because estrogen gets all the focus, but the microbiome for the average endometriosis sufferer is completely altered. We have dysbiosis, which is an imbalance of gut bacteria for the worst. In the gut, that can be the small intestine, the large intestine, the stomach, in the entire reproductive tract. There's like the vagina, the fallopian tubes, the endometrium, the follicular fluid, the peritoneal cavity. So dysbiosis in the place where you're not even supposed to have bacteria, much at all, right? Where your endo lesions probably are. So addressing bacteria is an absolute huge one and a necessity that goes far beyond looks. There's all that talk about endo belly and I'm so bloated or I have digestive issues, but those aren't just symptoms that are annoying. Those are symptoms that could be directly affecting your endometriosis, constantly triggering an immune response, because what does your immune system hate? Bacteria. That's how we're alive, right? Like not decomposing on the ground because your immune system keeps attacking it. But if your bacterial imbalances never get balanced, say you have bacterial imbalances in your reproductive tract, and then every 3 weeks you have your period. What happens when you have your period? You also have retrograde menstruation. Yeah. That's widely known. Like 90% of women, maybe 100% have retrograde menstruation. But if your menstrual blood is like the majority of other endometriosis sufferers with 4 to 6 times more E. coli in it, and that's going into your peritoneal cavity. Your immune system is going to attack your peritoneal cavity, the outside of your organs in your pelvis, every single time you have your period. And then if that lingers more, right, it just becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy of damage that kind of never stops. So looking at those factors, even issues, well, obviously I'm a nutritional therapist, so there's so many nutritional bits here. But it's shown the average person with endo actually eats less antioxidants than someone without endo before their diagnosis. So that's kind of some interesting stuff, that antioxidant deficiency can contribute to the disease. And that should be obvious, because if you're not familiar with antioxidants, that they are the only thing that stop free radicals. So you could say inflammation, that the inflammation damage, the thing that stops it is antioxidants. And you need to eat those antioxidants. There's 3 your body makes, but your body will make even more if you eat a lot of other antioxidants. And they're found in fruits and vegetables as well as animal products. We have zinc and CoQ10. Iron is absolutely necessary to help antioxidants move around the body. So this isn't about just focusing on, plants for antioxidants, but I do see a lot. And I think that's a misinterpretation that can be harmful. But eating a balanced diet that is so rich in these phytonutrients and antioxidants that can combat this chronic inflammation. I like to do some math stuff. And when you look at how many antioxidants are recommended for a normal person, say to prevent acute deficiency, and how many in the literature are shown to help someone with endometriosis, that you may need 56 times more antioxidants than the RDA or RDI. I don't know what it is in the UK called, but it's your recommended daily amount of nutrients in order to start to combat that inflammation. So it's this two-pronged thing, right? You want to lower your inflammation as well as increase all of the things that fight inflammation. So that's a dual part there. So those are just a few things of many. The book has many, many layers there, but nutrition, microbiome work, stress work, movement work, like what you're doing. Movement is absolutely essential for all women, right? Not just the endometriosis body, but we often have so many kinks in our lines, right? Like when I started moving more, I didn't realize how tight I was in so many different areas. And then when you're so tight, you don't move right anymore because your body starts to overcompensate. And when you start to overcompensate and you lose the strength in your core, it can just be a nightmare for pelvic health in general. And you add endometriosis onto that, and it contributes to inflammation. It contributes to pain. There's some research that shows just moderate exercise can reduce endometriosis pain more than painkillers, which is like whoa, really? That's cool. If that works for some people.
Yeah, and I think there's a big fear around moving, and I think you alluded to that in your chapter around move more, I think it's called. And you had said it just doesn't feel like when you first are in that feeling of pain and your symptoms are flaring up, or you're in that chronic state of experiencing that, it doesn't feel like the natural thing to want to do. To actually get up and move. But as soon as you do start to introduce that, whether it's a daily walk or it's a short movement practice of yoga, whatever it may be, and we need to explore what works for each person because we're all different, but it just feels so much better. There's space, you can feel the blood flowing through the body, and we need the blood flowing to the uterus and the organs so that everything is working in the way it's supposed to. But there is such a fear. And when I first came to Instagram to explore what I could do with my own symptoms, I really did feel like there was a sort of anti-movement, if that makes sense. There was a lot of
anti-everything on social media.
Yeah, it's true. You do have to wade your way through, don't you? Yeah, it can be a bit of a terrifying place. Something that really caught my eye as well with some of your, and I love your approach to everything being scientifically based and evidence based. And you talk a lot about there being so many different types or different forms of endometriosis phenotypes as well. And what can we understand from that? Because I have the feeling that we think about this as being a stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, and sometimes that's as far as we go with our thinking. And we recognize, or we start to talk more about how somebody with stage 1, they might experience more pain than someone with stage 4, and that's the extent of what we go to. But what would you how would you elaborate on that? What can we understand from that finding, or the beginning of those findings?
It's a great question. And for me, it helps so much to better understand this disease. I say so many people say endometriosis is confusing, and I like to flip that and say endometriosis is complex.
Yeah.
And understanding the complexities, we can understand why some people have period pain and some people don't. And some people have endometriosis progress during pregnancy, and some people have endometriosis regress during pregnancy, right? You think, oh, it's so confusing, but the reality is that there's a lot of different types of endometriosis, like you said. And uh, at the doctor, you'd be diagnosed with there's superficial, and then deep infiltrating, and then an endometrioma. And there's a fourth option that's called the rest. And the rest is this holding place for all of these other types of endometriosis that are coming down the pipeline. That right now there's 65 different types that have known differences. And I'm sure that's going to expand even more. So, you know, some endometriosis is highly sensitive to estrogen, like 140 times more estrogen receptors than a normal endometrial cell. So if you think you have normal amounts of estrogen, not even high levels, that endometriosis could just grow. And these people might do really, really well with hormonal therapies, versus some endometriosis doesn't have that many estrogen receptors. It's less responsive to estrogen, but it might be way more responsive to things like bacteria or the nervous system. So this culminates in creating very different symptoms for different people. And different people can have different types of endometriosis within their body as well, which makes treatment more challenging, right? Like you could have 2 or 3 different types of endometriosis, and maybe different types of treatments work for them. I don't say that to scare anyone, because then it suddenly sounds really complex again, like over your head. But it's just to remind us that there's so much to this disease. And I'm really, really, really looking forward to the next 10 years as research comes out and we have way better diagnostic skills, and being able to say, like, you know, like if you get cancer, they can go and find the exact type of cancer that you have and where it is in your body, because they're just so equipped to do that. So imagine the day that they do that with endometriosis. They tell you the type, and that some people might do well, honestly, having a surgery first thing, because they have, quote unquote, that type of aggressive endometriosis, such as like the types of a really aggressive breast cancer, right? They're like, you need to get that out immediately. This is the worst type of breast cancer. And there's other types of breast cancer that are more benign. You can take your time a little bit with it more. With endometriosis, we're lucky that it doesn't kill us, right? Like I say, it's a double-edged sword, but maybe if it killed us, people would take it a little more seriously. You know, I hate to throw that out there, but for the meantime, it would be, you know, awesome when we can actually get diagnosed with a certain type. I never had an excision surgery. Some people do fine without getting a surgery, and this ended up being my story, but it's something that I like to remind everyone that you might absolutely need a surgery, no matter how holistic you want to treat this disease.
Yeah.
It is like a very medical, diagnosable condition that involves the pathological growth of tissue, and you might have the, you know, the unlucky winner of that really aggressive type of endo that keeps growing, or even if it doesn't, that just causes you really, really terrible pain. There's no one size fits all approach to endometriosis, which makes it really hard if you're not in this field like maybe you and I are, and just so interested in reading about it. You know, some people is like, I don't care. Like, I like the things that I'm doing and I want to get on with my life. So can you tell me exactly what to do? And it's frustrating to have a practitioner say, well, you have to find out what works for you. Like, what are your biggest triggers? And you might just have no idea. So, you know, part of maybe the process, like you're saying, is also just remembering that we need to slow down, you know, as a culture. And when I was trying to first find out what, you know, how to feel better, it felt really good. I didn't realize I actually felt terrible, but I felt like I was being productive when I would just Google something, be like, oh, I have candida. Oh, I bet I do. I need to do this really intense candida cleanse for 30 days. That feels really productive. I'm going to buy all these supplements, and now I'm doing something for this. And there was no part of me that was like putting on the brake saying, okay, Katie, you have like a chronic inflammatory disease. Your whole body is going haywire. You need to stop and kind of recheck yourself, you know, and just kind of figure out how to get back to equilibrium. It doesn't mean you have to stop your whole life and never go forward again. It's like you can clear your head out and clear your body out, and, you know, proverbially, and then keep going again at a better pace, a more sustainable pace, not the unsustainable pace. So many of us are going, you know, on rocket fuel, and we don't realize how unsustainable that is until we do develop the chronic fatigue. You know, so many women who have chronic fatigue were just pushing for a long period of time. That was definitely me. So doing the things to slow down, you know, forcing a a nice postpartum like you had, a supportive postpartum where you can realign your body in different ways and start to get on the path of what do I need to do? Okay, maybe I never realized my digestive symptoms are actually horrendous because I'm so used to it. And I think everything's fine, but it's like, no, I obviously have something like SIBO, which is small intestinal bacterial growth, or some sort of thing that needs to be addressed. And, you can start, once you start checking in with your body, it does become easier. I like never had conversations with my body before. It was just this thing attached to my brain. I was like, so Western in every way.
I think so many of us are like that, though, until we're faced with something that we have to deal with. There's not that connection in the early stages anyway.
Totally. Yes, totally. Such a disconnect. I was even just so disconnected from my cycle, from being a woman, is something that like birth control took care of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or it was just, yeah, just there was no understanding of like my body. And now I feel so sensitive in a good way. As I'm sure you do too. Just
Yeah, absolutely.
feeling like this actually isn't something like I should be doing a lot. Like that's not so great for my body, or this food really fills me up and makes me feel great. So I'm going to like, focus on eating these things more rather than like cutting more foods out.
I think that's a danger, isn't it? So many people will go to the extremes of cutting things and reducing and limiting as a way to try and deal with the symptoms. And it's a nutrient hungry situation where we need to be really feeding and fueling ourselves. And as you said, the statistics are just wild in terms of the differences with antioxidants of our needs with endometriosis versus without. And I think it's just that reminder of taking care of ourselves. And I think you alluded to it earlier as well, this chronic stress mode that we're in, and women in particular, perhaps, we feel like we've got to do everything, achieve everything. We want to research. And even when we sit down to relax, it's with the TV or scrolling on our phones. And if you monitor your heart rate in any shape or form, with the sports phones, sports watches and everything now, it's quite horrifying to realize that actually you're not at all relaxed when you're watching some of these movies, and I don't know, so many different moments when you think you're relaxed, but you're just not. And the impact that
Yes,
has.
or when you should be relaxed. Yeah. So anyone who's watching this is curious to find out, that's what I did. I do this professionally, and I was still very surprised when I put on a stress tracker. Here in the United States, we have Whoop. It's WHOOP. I don't know if you have that one, but it's a 1 month free, and then you subscribe. So I kind of played the system a little bit, but I thought I'd test it out for a month and see. And I was so blown away that my stress levels at times that I thought were fine, like that's manageable, I'm just a little annoyed, were actually like they stress as if I was an Olympic athlete, like running for the gold on a sprint. Like that's,
Really
the
bad.
highest that it could possibly be. And the really great thing about those trackers is not to say, oh my God, I'm stressed all the time, is to say, how can I change that situation? So mine was school drop off. I don't know if you have that.
Yeah,
School drop off
same.
and bedtime was like my stress was so high, and I thought
Straight through the
this
roof.
is not right. So I changed it. I changed the whole environment of both of those things, and now it's so much easier. I think we forget that we have a lot more control than we realize over those stress levels. And then the point also, if you can't control the situation, you control how you react to the situation. So doing the things like just remembering to breathe, knowing that something's going to bring you stress, and then focusing on the calming within, which does take practice. But if you know there's a time that you can practice it, it's just like working out, right? You just have to work out your nervous system and focus on it when you can. So yeah, and that's what nervous system dysregulation is too. It's when you're having a stressed out moment in times that aren't stressed. Your nervous system is perceiving a threat when you're not threatened. A big one mine used to be was like ruminating while doing the dishes, just ruminating while doing things like chores around the house, rehashing issues that like didn't need to be rehashed. I didn't need to like replay that conversation in my head over and over. But once you start to check in again to your body, I didn't even know I was doing it until I, was able to check in with my body and say, oh, well, that can't be great. And learning how to change how your nervous system is responding, that you are not under threat all the time, 24/7. Reframing that is the most important thing I think you can start with as the foundation for healing from these chronic diseases.
Absolutely. So I think as a takeaway, and for the listeners, is if we're at the beginning of our journey, and there's not one size fits all sort of answer for this, but tracking and being aware and finding ways to sort of monitor how you're feeling day by day, notice what different things sort of trigger you in terms of your mood, your energy, potentially, as you say, looking at the heart rate and where your stress moments are. These are the sorts of
Yeah.
things that people could easily get started with. Is that sort of, is there anything that you'd sort of add in there?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I mean, it sounds too simple, right? It sounds kind of annoying if you're dealing with life
Yeah,
altering pain. Like start to
it does.
check in on your stress levels. Like that is absolutely one thing. Sometimes it's like a chicken and the egg scenario that you can be so stressed and frankly traumatized from the amount of pain that you have. Or if you're not dealing with pain, or pain and infertility, because I think that's the other type of endometriosis that deals with that kind of traumatic stress, is to do everything you can to alleviate that pain while at the same time working on the nervous system dysfunction, because you really can't calm the nervous system alone with an inflammatory disease. So it's one piece of the puzzle, and it's actually the piece of the puzzle I'm only getting to now that's been so beneficial for me this late in the game, even without even endometriosis symptoms. But so much before this, I think, paved the way for me to be able to focus on it,
Yeah.
getting rid of all those other life-altering symptoms. So, even if you have the terrible pain, doing everything possible to alleviate that, so you're not having those moments every 3 weeks, and even using, things like birth control to stop your periods for a number of months, I'm a big fan of, in order to help retrain the body to get through every month. Because it really is, every 3 weeks having life-altering pain is not okay. That can change your entire brain chemistry and body chemistry. And this is too short of a podcast, but I talk at length about all the things that are known to reduce period pain, right? Everything from moving, the chapter is move more and also move better. So move more, move better. Removing those triggers that can be causing pain, like doing HIIT workout classes, or like I mentioned, squats earlier. Doing squats incorrectly can just shove your uterus right down on your pelvic floor, and boom, you have really terrible, painful periods. Pelvic floor dysfunction, pelvic congestion syndrome, nutrients deficiencies can cause period pain, deficiencies in omega-3, deficiencies in zinc, and food intolerances as well. So there's like those lucky women you hear about who removed dairy and all of their endometriosis symptoms went away, right? This is, at least I know someone that happened to. And for them, that was like their really big trigger, and they were really lucky they had one big trigger, which it kind of, I guess, coincides with the last chapter of my book. I have some of my biggest advice is never discount the low-hanging fruit with these chronic diseases, that they can be so complex, but many of us have incredible results from doing things that sound almost too simple. Like, wow, I really increased my water. I increased my zinc consumption. I started sleeping better, and I got off screens. And all those things, you don't realize the interconnectedness of the body, but by doing that, your stress levels fell. And by your stress levels falling, your gut microbiome started to balance, because your microbiome will balance if you're not stressed out, right? It doesn't have anything to do with antibiotics or fiber. It's all interrelated in these different ways, and your muscles relax, you don't have so much muscle tension. So I say never discount those little tiny things, because they're free, and not all of us have, thousands and thousands of dollars for functional medicine practitioners, or $50,000 for a surgery. And it doesn't hurt. That the great things about all those low-hanging fruit, the ones that are going to bring you body health, is that there's no side effects, and the best thing they can do is actually give you more energy or stamina, or focus, so that if you do need more intensive care, then you're actually more able to function and problem solve. You're not just so inflamed that you have that brain fog. This is where I was at. I couldn't solve my way out of like a simple toddler puzzle. I just couldn't think clearly. And then finally having brain power again is like, wow, you don't realize how stuck you can get, almost just because you can't think of the solutions that are potentially right in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really great advice. And there was one thing that if you don't mind, I would like to just hop back to, really, around the move better and move more piece. And you were making the joke, but in a serious way, about this idea of doing the squats. And if you're not doing them in the right position or with the right sort of setup, you can actually create more pain and then inflammation as well. And you shared a lot around your journey with your posture. and the pelvic tilt, and how that sort of learning how the core worked, and the functional reason of having everything in balance really made a big difference for you. Can you talk to us a little bit about that impact for you?
Yeah, so I learned so much about intra-abdominal pressure, and I don't think most people know that the contents of your abdomen are under pressure. Because when I think of pressure, I think of like a soda can popping in the heat and there's big explosion. I think, well, if you got poked, you wouldn't explode everywhere, but it's a really mild pressure. So if you think of a balloon that has been blown up very big, but now it's deflated. So it's like kind of squishy. You can squish the air around. That's more like what's in your abdomen, because you breathe, yes, but when you breathe air in, it doesn't like blow out of your belly button, right? It's a very contained unit. So when you inhale air, if you don't make more room for that, the pressure will push your organs down. And I guess I say make room for that because in how the body's normally supposed to function is that when you breathe in, your ribs, your intercostal muscles, move out to the side. So your diaphragm isn't just moving down, which is what you learn with deep belly breathing. Your diaphragm isn't just moving down, it's also widening. And to do that takes strength. And, I live on Kauai, so there's a lot of people who you see who are surfing and they're, really using their body. They have no problem doing this. If you watch children, they have no problem doing this. But if your ribs end up being locked shut because of whatever reason, either atrophied, you're not moving your arms right, you're not breathing, you're only breathing through your chest, then the diaphragm can only descend low. And when that happens, it actually just constantly pushes your organs down rather than widening, right? It's pushing them down. And what they push down onto is your pelvic floor. So that's, it can be a really, really enormous contributor to pelvic floor dysfunction, is just this constant breathing pattern. And then you move the breathing pattern into exercise. So you're putting heavy loads on your body. And now you have the load combined with the breathing. And this is how, you can have all sorts of issues happen, terrible low back pain, in the worst case prolapse, where your uterus or your rectum can actually fall out of your nether regions. And that's common, not common, but it's not uncommon postpartum, but it's actually becoming more and more common for women who aren't postpartum. And this is interesting, especially in the yoga world. So women who are doing yoga incorrectly, you constantly need to brace your core a correct way. And if you don't, then you're just putting that pressure, and eventually the pressure can pop an organ out, or at least force it to be out of alignment. And we know that there's so many uteruses out there that are out of alignment, so much so that the OB-GYNs are telling us, oh, a tipped uterus is totally normal. A retroverted uterus is very normal, but they're just so common. When you have all of the organs sitting, your uterus is at the very bottom of your organs. And I think organs are 11 pounds without food. So now you add in food and water and everything else. And you'd see that little pooch right under your belly button. If you see that a lot, that's visual of your organs squished down quite low. The core should naturally brace them up, right? It's called your natural corset. You don't need a Kim Kardashian corset. You just need your musculature to work, and retraining it becomes absolutely essential when dealing with pelvic pain.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting, the mention of the yoga, and how we do see in group classes as well, a lot of women who are moving in such a way that the pelvis is just not, it's not moving in an easy way. So the ilium, when we walk, each half of it should be moving forward and backward as we're going. So there's naturally this hydration that happens around the tissues that support the SI joints and everything around the back. And when we're dealing with pain, and a chronic pain, this area around the pelvis is just stuck. And then you see women trying to come into a forward fold and sort of forcing that movement, but there's not the flexibility or the pliability or the hydration there to do that. And in yoga, in a typical class, the sun salutations take up the forward fold aspect of it, is such a big part of the process. And that's when we start to we see people getting injured or finding discomfort in that lower back, because there's more and more of those movements. And if there's not the fluidity for the pelvis to kind of move in the way it should, back and forth, or even, in the left and right direction as well, things just don't go well. That repetition of movement is not good. Yeah. Okay.
I felt like that just you doing the blocky hand movements. 10 years ago, I felt like that was my body. Like I couldn't seem to move it. Like my pelvis seemed so stuck like in concrete. And I would always go down this line of my hips are so tight. That was like my thing. And so I was always trying to like stretch them like that was the solution, like rather than rehabbing the entire way your body moves. And my word that I use to describe this now, because it seems so big and large and massive, is actually repatterning, because you already move throughout your day. So you just move differently and you focus on something just like movement for, 3 to 6 months, and really like doing the physical therapy, learning how to move correctly, developing your glutes so that your leg can actually extend behind you rather than, stomping in front of your body. There's so much tension in the front of our bodies and weakness in the back. So repatterning how you walk, and then over time, it just becomes normal again because you've repatterned it. But otherwise, I was just, you say I was one of those girls in yoga class and I was just spinning my wheels. I just felt like I was so tight. Every time I went back to yoga, I was so tight. And then I'd learn a way to almost move that would like hyperextend. So it looked like I was more
bendy.
nimble than I was. Because I was like, well, other people are doing it, so why can't I do it?
Yeah, absolutely. I see it all the
I
time.
appreciate you teaching that.
And it's interesting because we spend so much of our time sitting down that naturally that front body is shortened. And then you add to that the pain aspect of this condition, and the stress aspect and the fear aspect. And all of that is just shutting down and compressing the front side of the body, and the organs again getting compressed, and breath gets naturally shorter. And there are so many knock-on effects from this. So yeah, it's such an interesting topic. And as we said at the beginning, we could dive deep into each of these areas and it would be its own little podcast. So much that we could cover. But thank you so much. And I would love to ask you to just share a little bit with our audience about how they can continue to learn with you. You obviously have this incredible resource with your book, Heal Endo.
The book has so much information in it. I mean, this touched like the surface of the surface of it. Heal Endo is available on Amazon and Amazon UK. And then I have a very extensive website too, healendo.com. And it just has its information, all endometriosis integrative care. So everything about endometriosis to diet and lifestyle, and it's all free. So as much, as you want to. I have people who write that say they were up all night reading every single blog and they learned so much. So that can be you too, if you want to go check it out. That's probably the best way to absorb this type of information, is the book and the blog.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and all of your wonderful knowledge and sharing with us today. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure.